It's Monday, August 11th, and our new weather pattern has officially arrived. And we can see that with our new weather pattern, we're not really going to be seeing as much widespread severe weather as we have been seeing the past couple of weeks. For today's severe storms, it's really only expected to be a small tongue stretching from northwestern Minnesota into eastern North Dakota, and a small bit down here in the Texas Panhandle. And I also think there is going to be the conditional threat of a couple of severe storms, even stretching up into parts of eastern Kansas, northeastern Oklahoma, and western Missouri. And today's threat is going to be fueled by the conditional risk of a couple of 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts in both of our marginal risk areas, and I do think that could also extend into our area out here in parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. And then the same goes for our hail risk. It will cover the same area, and it will be for the conditional threat of some hail in the range of 1 to 2 inches in diameter. And the Storm Prediction Center has not outlined a specific tornado risk area. However, I do think there's a conditional threat of a couple of weak spin-up tornadoes in our northern plains risk area and parts of North Dakota, Minnesota, then also our area that I've been mentioning in parts of Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. And then for the third day in a row, there is a pretty significant threat of some flash flooding out here today in parts of the Midwest and Central Plains, with that greatest corridor being in parts of southeastern Kansas, where we could expect to see widespread 3 to 4 inches of rainfall, with some isolated areas even receiving up to 6 inches of rainfall, and expanding anywhere in the slight risk, which stretches from parts of eastern Colorado all the way to the southern area of Wisconsin. We could see widespread 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, and the same would go for a slight risk area out here in parts of eastern Georgia, South Carolina, and southeastern North Carolina. And then for our marginal risk out here, with our other one being out here in parts of the desert Southwest and also central Florida and parts of the Southeast, we could see 1 to 2 inches of rainfall in those areas as well. And then in the tropics, our tropical wave coming off of Africa currently, the question is no longer whether it will form, but it is where it will go. It currently has a 90% chance of formation out here in the main development region. So it's pretty much set in stone that this will develop into something. Now, the question will be, will it impact the US, or will it just turn out into the Atlantic and be a fish storm? Currently, the models are trending towards that Atlantic fish storm path, which is definitely good news for the United States, but it is still probably pretty far out in that 10-day region of things. So it's not really worth guessing where this will go and the intensity of where it will be, but it's definitely good that we're seeing the models trend away from the US at all. And then for our temperatures today, we're going to see a lot of high to mid 90s to even low 100s feels like temperatures in our Florida, lower Mississippi River Valley, and Southern Plains area. Then we could see a lot of low 90s feels like temperatures in a corridor stretching up through the Mississippi, Ohio River valleys, and even into the Great Lakes region. And we're also going to see a lot of above average temperatures on the Pacific coast, again, anywhere in that high 90s to low 100s range, with that low 100s likely being in the central California valley. And then here's what the radar could look like today in the southern plains. We're going to see some storm initiation out here in eastern New Mexico around the late afternoon hours, then also potentially some storm initiation along a cold front, which would stretch all the way from central Oklahoma back into the Texas Panhandle. And our main area to watch is going to be this cluster out here in eastern New Mexico, pushing in to the Texas Panhandle. In this area, we could see the conditional threat for some 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gust, and also some small hail in that 1 to 1.5 inch range of things. Now, the greatest activity with this line would likely be further in the far north Texas Panhandle, along where there could be an outflow boundary from yesterday's storms, but likely these storms would continue eastward into after nightfall today and would finish up around early Tuesday morning. And here's what the radar is going to look like in our second main area to watch today up here in the northern plains. And we're going to notice two main areas of severe weather, which would initiate around the late afternoon. One is going to be in front of a cold front, and that's going to be out here in parts of northern Minnesota. In that area, I do think we could potentially see some high gusty winds around 60 miles an hour to 65 miles an hour, and also potentially some smaller hail in that 1 to 1.5 inch range of things. And then back closer to our big low pressure system or cyclone pushing through, and also an area of troughing, we could potentially see the risk of all hazards of severe weather. So potentially a couple of weeks tornadoes, and also that threat for hail and wind likely being at the same level as our storms initiated on that cold front. And those would initiate around far eastern North Dakota and push into northern Minnesota as we go through the night. And these storms would likely be done producing severe weather right after nightfall today. And then our last area, which I could see some severe weather happening today, would be in front of a remnant mesoscale convective vortex and some redevelopment. Also, this would be helped by that cold front, which is also helping to initiate some storms back in central Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle, like we talked about. But this would be in parts of eastern Kansas and western Missouri. And I do think this is definitely going to bring the threat of possibly all threats of severe weather. So a couple of weak spin up tornadoes and mostly wind, 60-mile-an-hour gust, and some hail in that 1 to 1.5 inch region. And this would also be in the late afternoon. And the threat with this would actually be over pretty early, around right after nightfall. And then here are our 500 millibar winds, which is going to show us where that forcing for our storms is going to be today. And a couple of things we notice are going to be our low pressure system, or remnant mesoscale convective vortex, pushing through Kansas and then into Missouri, which is why I do think we could definitely see some severe weather out there in that area. And then our big trough pushing in over our northern plains risk area, mostly eastern North Dakota and northern Minnesota, which is also going to bring some organizing shear and initiating forcing for those storms out there. And we actually don't see really any troughing activity down in our eastern New Mexico to Texas Panhandle risk area, but this is because this is going to be initiated by likely some dry line activity, some cold front activity, and also just that high plains convergent zone magic. And here is the storm environment today in our eastern New Mexico, Texas Panhandle risk area, which could potentially bring the threat of some damaging winds and smaller hail. We do see that we have some organizing shear brought by a high pressure system in the area. And then we also have some wind veering. Now, these storms are likely going to be higher based, which is going to eliminate that threat of tornadoes pretty much altogether, but will actually increase that threat of some damaging winds. That is one of the reasons why I do think there could be some 60 to 70 mile an hour damaging winds out there. Also, there's going to be some dry air aloft, a pretty high downdraft cape around 1300, then also a pretty low relative humidity, which brings some evaporative cooling, sinking air, and also higher damaging winds. So although our precipitable water is pretty low at around 1.35, that's still actually somewhat decent. I do think there are going to be other ingredients out here, definitely bringing that threat for 60 to 70 mile an hour damaging winds. That would be the main threat. And then also some hail, which although this storm mode is going to be pretty linear, I do definitely think we could see some hail around the 2-inch range in the earlier stages. That's going to be as we have a decent amount of organizing shear, so strong updrafts are likely, a decent bit of cape up here in our freezing level, and our mid-level lapse rates are also going to be 8.3 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. Now, the last thing is that we have a pretty moist environment for the area, 60 dew point, and a modestly unstable environment around that 2,500 to 3,000 cape region, so just generally favorable for severe weather altogether today. And here's our storm environment in that Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri risk area. We actually aren't going to see a lot of shear, which could possibly bring down that tornado threat, and is why it's currently very conditional. But because it is going to be in front of a mesoscale convective vortex and on a cold front, and our shear vectors are actually somewhat parallel to where our storms are actually expected to be, I do think we could see a couple of spin ups in there, and our cloud base would also be low enough to support that. But mostly it's going to be just a threat for general severe weather and quite a bit of flooding. Fueling that is going to be a fairly high dew point, 73 dew point, and also a pretty unstable environment, actually 4,200 cape. So very favorable for severe weather. Then our 3 cape is also going to be nearing 100, which is fueling that threat for general severe weather, and also helping to support that threat for a couple of weak spin up tornadoes. And also our precipitable water is around 2 inches, which is why there is that threat for some high amounts of flooding, around some areas receiving 5 to 6 inches of rainfall, and also some stronger downdrafts, possibly bringing some 60 mile an hour damaging gust as well. And here's the storm environment in the northern plains, specifically in front of that cold front in Minnesota. We are going to notice that we do have some nice organizing shear, so definitely some organized storms lasting for quite a bit. And we actually have some nice low-level shear and low-level helicity, but because our cloud bases are expected to be somewhat high, that threat for tornadoes is going to be fairly low. We do have a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing level, and also our mid-level lapse rates are going to be around 7 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. So definitely the threat of potentially some hail around 1 inch in diameter, but mostly we have a moist environment, a somewhat unstable environment around 1,300 cape. Not super high, but definitely enough for storms to be there, potentially in that severe range. Then we also have a 3 cape around 100. So just favorable for severe weather up here today in general, in front of that cold front in Minnesota. And here's the environment from the same area, except it's going to be a tad bit more west in front of that cyclone in parts of eastern North Dakota. We are going to notice that our cloud base would be low enough to potentially support a tornado threat when our low-level helicity and shear isn't going to be all that bad. So definitely, I do think there could be potentially a couple of weak spin-up tornadoes in front of our cyclone in parts of eastern North Dakota. But the main thing is once again going to be a pretty nice area of moisture, 61 dew point, in a somewhat unstable environment, 1700 Capeland, also a pretty high 3 Cape, over 150, also feeling that threat for a couple of weeks, spin up tornadoes, but mostly just general severe weather as well. And then there is also a decent bit of dry air aloft, so potentially some damaging 60-mile-an-hour gusts. Then we also have some Cape up here near our freezing level, and our freezing level is fairly low, around 12,000 feet. And then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be 7.1 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. So also that threat of potentially hail in that 1 to 1.5 inch range out here, closer to that cyclone in eastern North Dakota as well.